Yo, guys, welcome to Coastal Connection. We're here today with Traci Nicole Smith, former teacher, and now she is out trying to help teachers become better versions of themselves. Traci, what's going on, girl?
Hi there. I have to say, my grandmother was so excited that I was coming on this show because we always watch her little inspirational videos, and you know she has a little crush on you.
You know what? Hey, so me and Mike G down here in Florida, and tell your grandma I said I appreciate it, but you don't call her grandma. You're from New Orleans, so what do you really call her?
Mama.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah, we got mamas and papas.
That's right. So, hey, me and Mike G are really glad you came on the show. And because of in the news, I was just on the news about talking about education and the shortage of teachers and military personnel going into the classroom. Now it's become a topic of a discussion. It's a political discussion, but around the United States, teachers, the stress on teachers, the requirements on teachers, the teachers to have to go to levels they've never seen before and have to do so much stuff outside the classroom just prepare to be able just to teach one lesson, certifications and everything. Trace, how do you see things happening and evolving right now? Because it seems like we have a struggle getting teachers into the classroom now.
Well, one of the great things about the pandemic, and believe me, you have to really dig deep because when the world paused, it was very stressful everywhere globally. But one of the great things about being on Twitter and being in a PLN, which is a professional learning network, or some people call them PLFs, professional learning family, because we've become such a tight-knit community. One of the things that's so great is that we had an opportunity to really engage with how are we going to move forward as educators after COVID. And so this was looking at all types of issues, most pressingly, how to dismantle racist structures, racist practices, and really what does it mean to be a reflective educator and to embody the anti-racist persona that you need in order to serve the community in the way that it needs to be served.
Oh yeah, you make a great point, because I think what happened with what COVID did is it made, and I always say this, as bad as COVID was, it actually made the playing field evenly, because people couldn't go to tutoring. People that normally could afford to do all these other things to be able to be academically ahead of other people were all now on the same playing field. So it was funny to see a lot of times them getting rid of standardized tests that normally it had to be that standardized test. So now that standardized test was gone, it really evened up the playing field. Now, the thing is, we started putting new structure into place. And so what I'm seeing now is that teachers are having to reevaluate themselves. And a lot of teachers did a lot of soul searching during COVID and realized, you know what, I'll put my time in. It's time for me to walk away from this game. And so now that we have a next generation of younger teachers coming into the field, what are some of the nuggets or some of the knots you think they need to start looking at as they decide to choose this profession over other professions going forward, to especially be able to communicate with the next generation, because this generation has access to information?
Exactly. I think the first and most important thing you need to ask is, do you believe all children are worthy of an effective, a solid, a successful education? What is education? What does it mean? And so back when inclusion, which is like putting special education children into the general ed classroom with support and services, when inclusion really got a boost in the 90s, you would hear a lot of the veteran teachers say, oh, well, I didn't go to school for special education. Like, I can't do that. With the new generation of teachers coming in, that's all wiped away. We know that there are going to be students who receive special education services being in your classroom. We're going to have English language learners in your classroom. You're going to have gifted kids in your classroom. You're going to have what's called SLIFE, which is students with limited or no formal education, which are students who've come in from, say, Ecuador. They're 15 years old. They've only had 3 years of education because they have cerebral palsy and didn't have the structures to help them in their native country. And so what happens is they come into the US and now they're in your classroom. So that's even different than an English language learner who may have been in school the entire time. They were in the Dominican Republic or another country and they came in. So when you enter into the field, you have to say, am I willing to do what it takes to make sure every child in my classroom is a success?
Right. And so, your website's really great. And you started talking about things about the soul, about teachers really having to find their passion. And I think a lot of people, after you've taught 10 years or however long, at some point you actually have to do a reevaluation. I mean, I'd love to know your take on that. Have to do a reevaluation. Kind of tell us that the structure of your website is awesome. And it really lays out some, and by the way, you're very educated. So that's funny. I went through your resume. I don't mean to go left field, but hey, that was like, whoo, 2 BAs, you got your education degree. I mean, your PhD. I mean, you're well versed in what you're talking about. So let me be out there clear to everyone. She's well versed in what she's talking about. So you're talking about human character earlier. So let me circle the wagon back around. You're talking about human character. So what are some of the things that people need to I'm not going to steal your thunder, but how are some of the things people need to evaluate in themselves to find themselves to be that spiritual teacher?
Well, I think, back to what you said earlier about, what do you say to the new teachers or the pre-service teachers that are coming in invested in this? We have to really look at life as one long lesson. What are we here to learn? When we learn these lessons, how can we make a difference in someone's life? There's a difference between interrupting somebody's learning process and trying to, like, almost in a codependent way, take away their pain. Part of this journey of being a human and being a soul here is that we come here to learn lessons. We come here to be closer to the collective, that we're all one. So you really have to ask yourself when you're coming in education, like, what do you believe in? Like, what is important to you? Do you think this was a calling? Were you called to this? How can you be of service without interrupting somebody's learning journey as far as their soul journey? And I think part of what we need to do is we need to look at what is education? What should we be able to do? We should be able to critically analyze, think for ourselves. And I think that's, when the standardized tests went on pause, I think part of that was really looking at going back to the anti-racist practices and looking at the cultural bias in these tests and saying, is this really a good measure of what people know and understand and should know? And are we doing enough critically analyzing information? Are we thinking for ourselves? Are we teaching people you could have the handbook of God and the handbook of the devil and be able to read both of the handbooks and then be able to analyze them in a way that makes sense to them, that they can then figure out what they truly believe in? There's a lot of fear right now in the school system. A lot of people are operating with the lack or fear consciousness, which is, I want everything for myself. This is a competition. There's more for me and less for you. Instead of looking at it that we can all be successful, we can all calibrate, we can all be together and not have to look at it as someone's taking something from you when someone else is successful.
Oh, yeah. You're on point. And here's my, you're right. And Mike's from the Dominican Republic, so I'm going to have to talk to
Oh,
Mike.
okay. I have a few friends from the DR.
All right. So when you just laid that out. So here's my thing with you. You have been through the hurricanes in New Orleans and seen that just the catastrophic effect they've had on education, and you've been through COVID. And the one thing that I look at is when we talk about education equality, we say that everyone, the state gets money, the money should go out equally to each school and renovations, whatever, and everybody should have an equitable, safe environment. But that doesn't happen. So as you've been through the hurricane and you saw New Orleans rebuild itself, and have to rebuild its infrastructure for education. The thing is, that's a grand opportunity for them to get back on board to evolve. As you going forward, do you see us as a nation or as just in your community? What's the best way for us to evolve to get to education equality?
Well, I think there is still this resentment that we see a lot from corporate America about how they feel about schools being shut down and teachers protecting themselves and their family. There is like, you did this to me, you owe me this. I'm in corporate America and you're disrupting my life and my money. How dare you do this? Instead of saying, well, it's a real inconvenience to me, but the teachers deserve to protect their children and their family. We don't know much about COVID, so I understand this is a frustration, but we're in this together. You're still seeing this anger from that corporate America that is, lashing out at teachers and saying, you get 3 months off, you stop working at 3, you have a union to save all the bad teachers. So the issue is teachers get so upset with that. And believe me, I do too, but I also can't focus on that negativity. We have a grand opportunity here to really come forward and say, for once and for all, are these standardized tests valid? Are they accurate? Are they reliable?
And not interrupt you, but I'm a prime example of this. Some kids know what foliage is and kids know what leaves are. It depends on where you grow up.
And that's it. And I think the thing is that for years, they've talked about cultural bias. I know there was an example like 20 years ago when I was in grad school where they asked, like, what do you use newspapers for? And like some of the students were like, shoes.
Whoa.
And that just blew people's minds. Because here we have this whole different level now of really looking at poverty in a way that we've never looked at before. And so, yes, we have a golden opportunity, but let me tell you, after Katrina, New Orleans had a golden opportunity to rebuild. And guess what happened? A lot of corruption. They bought into programs and got kickbacks from the vendors. They opened up charter schools and overcharged special education services. People were getting really high salaries. So we always have to look at what are the checks and balances that we can do to make sure that doesn't happen. And, that's getting involved with your school board. That's going to school board meetings. That's asking for more transparency. As far as having more equity, I think really you as an educator, you have to look at your mindset and your heart set. Do you really love all children? If you're harboring this anger and resentment about the immigration system, and that's something that you're perseverating on, and it's something that's the fuel in your life right now, and every time it's on TV, you're screaming at the TV and you're yelling about it, you're entitled to your political belief, but what kind of energy do you think you're bringing into the classroom?
Oh, Mike, you got anything on that, man?
Yes, I do. So that's a lot of great information. You just hit the nail on the head in 10 minutes of the show already started. But the thing is, what do you see the pushback is? What gets you really riled up? And what do you want to show in the system that you're doing? What are your executions? What are you trying to really push and have people understand?
Healing, that it's all about, are you on your own healing journey? You're either on your healing journey or you're not. And if you are or not, because if you're somebody who's constantly reacting to everything that goes on around them, and a kid can trigger you and the news triggers you, and somebody cuts you off in traffic and you're laying on the horn, you're spewing anger everywhere, you're probably not fully on your healing journey. We're on a healing journey for life, right? So my point is, if you're full of triggers and anger and bitterness and resentment, there's all kinds of things, not just therapy. There's all different kinds of things. Yoga is a great way to move emotions through the body, but you have to do something. If you're in the school system, you have an obligation to the school, to the community, the students, and to the world to be your best self. And if you're somebody who's spewing venom in the schools and you're constantly upset and everything bothers you, it's probably less about what's happening now and more about something that you've buried deep inside of you. You have
Whoa.
to be willing to excavate the pain and get to the bottom of it. Because if you think about it, think about like a Mother Teresa. She's like completely and totally like embodies compassion. It's not that she didn't have difficulty in her life. It's that she's doing the work. She's doing the spiritual. She's on the journey. She's forgiving. She's looking at herself. She's taking responsibility. And so when she sees people, she sees them all as one versus the person who's, constantly reacting and, oh, they don't have any problems and they're popping pills and drinking and, they're out like doing what they need to do to just numb the pain. Then you don't see yourself as, part of this collective community. You're really seeing this separation because you're separated from yourself.
Oh, hey, preach it, girl, preach it. Hey, I've been to church today, Mike. And so, so I'm going to throw a curveball on you real quick here. All right, so historically, let's talk about New Orleans because I'm from Shreveport, Bossier area, and I've been to New Orleans because my dad's from the New Orleans area. So let's just talk about this real quick. Many years ago, after the Civil Rights Act was signed in 1964, and then in 1965, the Voter Rights Act was signed, a lot of southern states decided, well, we don't want to integrate. So they kind of dragged it all the way to the 80s pretty much. And so they started standing up private schools. As these private schools stood up, they were really another new form of segregation. So in the fact that these schools stood up, money was being filtered to these schools, and lack of money was going to the public schools where predominantly were minorities or African Americans and Hispanic students. Do you see a change in that now in the 21st century? Because that was put in place like at the end of the 70s, going into the 80s, and pretty much was predominant during the 80s and 90s. But now at the 21st century, do you think we've gotten better? Like, besides them just taking the athletes they need from the other schools to get them in their schools so they could play football or whatever. But overall, you think we've evolved, or we're evolving overall in some of the areas in the South on this?
No.
Oh, go ahead.
I don't. And I'll tell you why. Now in New Orleans, I go to a gym, and so it's not like an all white gym, right? It's all walks of life. I cannot tell you how many people have worked out next to me on the treadmill or the bike, and we've had conversations, and they said they are scrimping and saving every penny and putting their kids in Catholic schools or Lutheran schools because they don't want their kids subjected to the public schools and all of the drama around it. So it's where it once was like elite. Now anybody who's like, can work 3 jobs and scrimp and save, and like 2 or 3 families can live together.
Wow.
This is what they're doing in order to go to the private schools. And, people always ask me, what would you do if you had kids? And I say, homeschool. Like in New Orleans, like homeschool. Like if you don't have the money, there's so much around homeschooling. And the reason that I feel that way is because New Orleans hasn't changed. If you look at our news, we have just this thread of corruption in Louisiana that goes back to the beginning of Louisiana. And it's still there. And there's corruption in all races and all economic, backgrounds here. And I don't see that it is getting better here. I still see people that want to put their kids in a different environment because they have the option to ask, a family to leave. They can be selective because they don't trust the school system because of the corruption.
And it's funny because I pretty much goes all the way back. Was it Howie Long? Well, not
Huey P. Long.
Yeah, Huey P. Long.
Yeah,
and it's been and just the heritage of just that stuff going back and forth on a regular basis. New Orleans is such a beautiful city, and if they would just put some money into just trying to eradicate the issues they have, I think it would be a great place for students to go to school. I just read, it breaks my heart every time you read the news on New Orleans and all the bad things that happen with students. I mean, 17-year-olds on down, you just can't believe the loss of life that's happened there over the last 10 years. So as you going through this, and before we wind this down, really want to ask you a couple of other questions. So the next question I got is, how does people get in contact with you to hire you to be able to, to come in and be a keynote speaker for them?
Oh, okay. Yes, I have a website, Traci with an I, NicoleSmith.com. My email address is Traci@TraciNicoleSmith.com. And I also just offer coaching to people who are in kind of a spiritual crisis and they don't know if they have, purpose, if they're worried about, let me just say this, that's really important. It's so important that you have purpose in your life, but you don't have to do for a living what your passion or your purpose is. You can make money in another way and still do that. So if your passion is, global education, it's not like you have to go travel over to China to be a teacher. You can do that through your PLN and learning more about global education and how to connect maybe your classroom to classrooms in China. So, there's different ways, but it's also just really being true to yourself. And I think right now people are afraid to be authentically themselves on some level because there's so much anger right now.
Well, you talk about people being authentic, and the struggle is, I think you have a cancel culture, you have political correctness, and there's so many things is that if you speak the truth, you can get attacked very quickly. And I'm not digress real quick, but somebody on the Housewives made a comment the other day, and it was really not a derogatory comment. She just didn't know who the person was. But the cancel culture of her being attacked like within 24 hours was unbelievable. But you also see that playing out with just in normal life now in communities, like if someone doesn't agree with something, and we saw it during the last election, which makes no sense because prior to that, some people voted for Bill Clinton and it didn't matter what party it was. Just people wanted the right guy to be in the job just to get things done for the country. So as we go on forward, what imprint and history do you want to leave and a nugget of knowledge that you want to leave to people that say, hey, this is what Traci Nicole Smith's all about?
I mean, I'm just all about when you're in your life, think about how you want to navigate your life. I even say this on my website. Do you want to be a lighthouse? So no matter what's happening to you, the waves are crashing, you're in a hurricane, that you learn how to stand strong and stay in your truth and not allow everything to get you off your track? Or do you want to be a buoy that's just bobbing around, just enduring life instead of enjoying it? So like my hope is that anyone who's been thinking about, going on the healing journey is to find what works for you, whether it's traditional therapy, coaching, yoga, EMDR. There's tons of different modalities out there. Find what works for you and really be able to start your healing journey, because without it, you're not going to experience joy. Life is hard enough with everything we have going on. If you don't experience joy, what is the point of living?
Oh, okay. I'm on point on that. So, as people evolved, and we've had all these issues over the last 10 years with COVID, with the natural disasters. Traci, you're a beacon of light. You're trying to make a difference and an impact. I truly tell your grandmother, I said hello from me personally, so she can watch this. Hey. And,
I'm sure will.
And me and Mike G always saying, thanks for coming on the show. You've been awesome. Hey, keep up with your success. And as we always say, keep it rolling.